Hello, and welcome to another in our long series of virtual trainings brought to you by the Smithville Area Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Smithville Public Library, and some other folks that I'm going to allow our library director, Judy Bergeron, to tell us about.
Thank you, April. And I would also like to welcome you. This program, these training activities come to us from the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the Texas State Library and Archives Commission through a CARES grant. And we're able to help support small businesses and help local economic development, hopefully through this. And there will be other technology trainings available as well. So stay tuned to the Chamber website, and we thank you for being here. You can also come to the library and get assistance with any of your technology needs and or small business needs. If we can help you with those, we'd love to. So Abigail, thank you for being here to provide the training, and April, take it away.
Thank you, Judy. I appreciate that. We're always so happy to work closely with the Smithville Public Library. They're great partners, and we're excited to be bringing these trainings to you today. Today's speaker, Abigail Jones, or Abigail Barrett, as she's now known as. This is a second in a series of great trainings that Abby's bringing to us that have to do with event spaces and how to transform your space into event spaces, if you'd like to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and let Abby introduce herself and get started with her program. I want to remind you all that if you have questions, you can put them into the chat box there at the bottom of the screen. Just click on chat, type in your questions. You can, or all of you have my text message, so you're welcome to text me as well. So we're going ahead and get started. And at the end of Abby's presentation, we'll take question and answer. Abby, thank you.
Thank you, April. Judy, I appreciate it. Happy to be here. I'm going to go ahead. So last week we talked a little bit about, well, it was focused more on your actual event space. We kind of went through the various spaces that you can use and kind of getting creative about that and expanding your mindset and what actually is an event space. So now that we have an event space, I really want to focus on planning your first event. So I want to go a little bit into my background for any of you who weren't last week, but I have been in the event industry since 2006, and I primarily work with oil and gas, tech, pharma, medical industries, and I started a business called Vintage Event Planning in 2011. I've worked with some clients such as Allergan, which is now AbbVie, Dolby Digital, Charles Schwab, Polycom, Microsoft, so kind of across the board. I attended UT and I got in BS in advertising. So it's a little bit about my background. I recently moved to Smithville about a year ago, so I'm still learning about the event spaces here in town. So today, we're gonna go over several things regarding either a launch event or a networking event. So depending on which one of these things you wanna do in order to promote your product, which is your event space, we're going to kind of go through the steps of planning an event from start to finish, because I know it can be very overwhelming if you don't have particular tools in place. So first, we'll be going over event goals, which is the most important aspect, and we're going to be using something called the SMART method. We'll establish a budget and talk about, what actually needs to go into a budget, talk about projected costs versus anticipated projected costs, and then of course anticipated versus your actual cost. Creating a timeline, which is very critical to keep you on track. And then we're going to determine your space grid, which is a layout we talked a little bit about last week, and then dive into determine your partners and vendors. So this is very important because it's going to be a reflection upon your business, because we're partnering with all these folks as you're planning your event. And then of course, marketing the event to get people there. And then we're going to go over the day of logistics, which are very important. So now that we have your event space, we're going to create a launch party or a networking opportunity in order to create awareness for that space. So this is a great opportunity to invite local vendors, local suppliers, your Chamber of Commerce, people who are going to be interested in perhaps using the space, event planners. So what you need to do initially is you need to develop goals for your event. So when developing goals for your event, it's important to take several things into consideration, which we'll be talking about. Because if you don't have clearly defined goals, then you're really not able to measure the success of your event upon completion. So I've talked about this past in the past in one of my presentations, but I really like this model. It's called SMART goals, and it refers to those being specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So just keeping these things in mind as you're creating your event. So you want it to be specific, well-defined who your audience is, clear and unambiguous. You want it measurable because at the end, you want to be able to measure the progress of the event and the accomplishment of the goal. Also, it needs to be achievable. You don't want something so far out that it doesn't make sense, and relevant, just kind of is in line with that. And then timely. So we talked about this a little bit last week, but you don't want to have an outdoor yoga event on a day like this where it's very cold outside. So with regard to the launch, I kind of outlined some examples using the SMART method. So being specific, what outcomes do you need to see to consider accomplished? So for example, like maybe lead generation is something you're looking for. So as people are coming into the party, you want to make sure you get their contact information, or maybe you're just trying to increase your business overall or promote awareness of your business because you're new. Measurable. So how will you decide if the goal is successful? For example, you want X amount of new business or X amount of new leads from the event. So if you have this networking event or launch party, say I want 50 additional leads that I'm able to follow up with post-event for potential business. You want it to be achievable, so not impossible to achieve, attainable. So something, start with small goals and then set larger ones over time. So maybe something like I want 5 new small events in April, May, and June of this year. And then making sure it's relevant and it, does it make an overall difference if the goal is met? So for example, is 5 events really going to make or break you compared to 4? And then timely. So you just want to be very specific on timing, on when you want these goals to be met as you're going through these steps. So one of the biggest things to talk about is budget. So as you're going into an event, you really want to outline everything that the cost and both the cost and the income for an event. So event budgeting involves making a prediction of the cost and income that is likely to be generated over the course of an event. So when I'm saying income, if you were doing a launch party, you may not have that piece as much unless you have like sponsorships or maybe some exhibitors that want to come in and promote their product within yours. But you're going to have quite a few costs. So it's important to be accurate, but you also want to continually update because I'm sure, as we all know, as we're planning things in life, things are always evolving, changing. You always want to reference that budget, over time, things are going to pop up and you want to add those in because small costs can very quickly become very large once it's compounded. So just keep an ongoing budget. And if you're referring back to that, then it's really going to help you understand every dollar you spend, this year while you're doing the event, and then next year if you choose to repeat it, and you're setting yourself up to stay on track to be within that budget. So these are just some of the things. Of course, I'm always happy if anyone has any questions about additional costs that might come up, but depending on the size of the event, the budget it can be smaller, a page long, or it could be, some of these clients that I work with, they have multi-million-dollar budgets for events that are going on. For incentive trips, for example, like if their sales team reaches their goals and they're sending them on a trip, you're talking about flights and hotels and larger ticket items, and it could be, a 10 to 15 to $20 million event. So with a networking event, it will be much smaller scale, but it is important to define all those. So rental costs is going to be one of them. If you have a blank slate and you don't have tables and chairs, that's just an example of something you may be renting, or linens. Catering costs. If you're in a restaurant or don't have a commercial kitchen, you'll be getting some catering costs. I always recommend getting multiple estimates from people in town. I always like to use local businesses to support them. So, just make sure and look at several different catering companies. Some are going to have incentives to use them. Maybe they include decor or whatever the case is, but make sure and get multiple estimates for all of these costs, because it'll really save you some money in the end. Transportation charges. So if you're busing in, for example, maybe you want different event professionals coming in from Austin and San Antonio to look at your event space, you would have a transportation cost associated with that. Decor. So nowadays, there's so many places online where you're able to do, decor on consignment or find creative ways through like Etsy to have a really beautiful space where it's not extremely expensive, but that does add up, especially if you're doing florals and things like that on a large scale. So that's a cost. Entertainment, including bands, and then equipment fees, things like audio, visual, anything else you need in order to make sure that the entertainment and the AV and everything is successful. So if you're having speakers, you're going to need some sort of sound system. Speakers meaning, if you have like a VIP or someone you're showcasing to come in and do a talk, you just want to make sure they have appropriate equipment. And you'll be working with the audio visual company in order to do that. Printing charges. So this could be anything from posters for the event, if you're putting them up around town, or if you're getting printed invitations, this would include that. So you want to outline all of your print charges. Gifts. So a lot of times, when we're doing incentive gifts for big corporate businesses, we have a welcome gift for the sales team. So, sometimes it's like really nice luggage that come out, and we actually have the company come out and do this big display of luggage, or we have like Ray-Ban come out and give gifts. Of course, if you're having a networking event, maybe it's something on a smaller scale and you have the local bakery in town do, something like a petit-four, something small to give out to attendees. So gifts is something you want to keep in mind. Activities, if you're doing anything, maybe you have a photo booth in there, or you have some sort of company coming in and doing a team building activity for the event, you can keep that in mind. And then of course, photography and videography, this is a good idea to at least get photography during your event. That way you can use those photos for both your website and then to promote the event post. So I know this is a little blurry, but I wanted to show you, this is very small budget, but this is an example of something that I use for conferences, and you can see how quickly things can add up. I just did some screenshots of it, but this is a conference that I'm working on for this coming year, and we have sponsors and exhibitors. So that's a good way to have income for your event is, get someone to sponsor certain things, like maybe the food part of it, and then doing that, maybe they put you put their logo on all the invitations that go out. You add some sort of like added value for the sponsors so they can get exposure. So you can see here, like we have at this particular event, we have different booths and different levels of vendor sponsorships. And then I'm breaking down some of these costs over here on the bottom part after the green. So, AV, venue rental, receptions, food and beverage. So these are kind of projected costs that I have in here, and then I'm going to have actual as I start plugging in numbers. This is some expenses that would be coming up: hotel rooms, design fees, everything down to like napkins I purchase, invitations, stage furniture, badges for the event. It really does add up. So it's important to make sure to include all of that information in here. And then also include any sort of overhead as far as like labor goes, staff, things like that. Because you'll want to reference this. If you're doing these events year over year, you want to go back and reference this information and see where there's sort of low-hanging fruit and opportunities for improvement. In doing this, the budget will be closely aligned with the timeline that you work on. So a timeline is very simple. I'm sure we all use them day to day, or their calendars, or some sort of form. And so it's just an overview of what needs to happen before, during, and after your event. So you want to develop your event goals and objectives that we talked about within that timeline to really keep you in track and make sure that all those things are covered. So what does a timeline include? So when you're having an event, these are just a small portion of some of the things it includes, but a timeline is really going to designate like roles and responsibilities. So if you have a team, typically I work with the team. So I have like an audiovisual team for big conferences. I have an executive VIP team. There's a lot of roles and responsibilities. So in the timeline, you want to include all of those roles and responsibilities as you're building it out, because it's going to make a big difference on the day of the event. So for something smaller like a launch party, you're going to have caterer roles, you're going to have florist roles, chef roles, greeters, things like that. So designate those roles and responsibilities and then kind of fit them into the overall calendar. So things that it would also include is like preparing a budget at some point. I mean, you may not have a budget from the very beginning, but you want to, by X date, you need to have a budget, because that's very important. And that's one of the first things that you're going to have to do. Invitation list. So who are you sending out your invitations to? How are you compiling that information? Are you creating an actual physical invitation? Or are you doing something like very creative that you're going to be sending out to everyone? That will also be listed in there. Decor and signage. This is a big one because for large events, signage is something that takes a lot of time. For big conferences, we're doing like wraps on pillars and hotels and huge amount of signage that takes a lot of time for a graphic design team and a production team to actually put together. So if you're doing signage for a small event or even posters, you just want to make sure that aligns with your marketing schedule, because everyone's on a deadline and your project is not always their priority. So you just want to give people enough lead time in order to produce what you need them to produce, so it's quality. Also, you want to put in there, reaching out to a caterer, maybe to a photographer and the band. So that's going to be a line item in the timeline. And then one of the largest ones, which we'll speak on a little more in a minute, is the marketing timeline and media. So you're really trying to promote your venue, right? So you are going to need to create a marketing timeline in order to do that. And some of these things you may already have in place, like a website or social media, but if not, you're going to have to input those things into the timeline as well in order to have a successful event. So for example, on December 20th, I need to start creating my social media profiles. On January, I need to have my website complete. And some of these things may already be in place, but if they aren't, they need to be added to the timeline for the event. And then this day of event timeline is something I actually call an event spec. And typically what I do is, because, a lot of that stuff on the timeline isn't relevant once you get to the day of, is I do something called an event spec. And for larger events, it's pretty detailed because you're going day to day, room by room. And a lot of our events are 7 to 10 day events, because you arrive on site several days early and then you're there post event. But it's called an event spec, and it really just outlines several of these things, but just for the day of. So like roles and responsibilities, who's doing what, who's greeting people at the door as they come in, who's managing the caterer, because it can very easily get hectic if you don't have someone managing each piece of your event. So you can't get bombarded with 1,000 questions the day of. So you really need to have someone handling like maybe floral and catering, and that's their job, or somewhere else is handling, greeting people and make sure you get their contact information as they're coming in. So those are just a handful of things that you want to include on a timeline. The internet, of course, is like a great resource for finding templates for this. I think even like Word and Excel have templates that you can use as a starter point. Of course, it's going to be dependent on the event that you're doing, but don't feel like you have to start from scratch, because there's a lot of free templates and resources out there where you don't have to do that. So this is just an example of something I pulled from an old email, but this is an event I was doing in 2019 for a company in Austin. And you can see what I like to do is I like to create like the days and then the task list and then how many weeks out we have left. So you can see here, for example, on September 11th, these are the things that I need to get done that day. right? So like chamber relevant stuff, put it on calendars. You know, I had a budget call, things like that. And it gets very detailed, but it helps keeps you on track. And then I like to put the number of weeks here on the right, because then it creates urgency on my end as far as getting stuff done. But this is just a small, I use Excel. I mean, there's so many tools out there that you can use now, but I kind of like Excel because I can easily print it and format it the way I want to and share it, but you can use whatever tool you'd like. So Space Grid, this is important. We talked about this a little bit last week as well when creating your event. So now that you have your space, you really need to define the areas that you are going to be using within that space for the event. So you can see here, this is just a very, I use this, you know, I grabbed this picture, but I used it because you can see how simple it is. You don't need to have some super detailed space grid, you know, where it shows everything that's in your event space. So we're just talking about usable space. So here you can see that the patio's outside. Maybe you're doing something out there, you know, you can draw in that the band's going to be in a certain space. We're doing cocktail hour over here, and they have these tall boy tables, a lounge area, and then we're doing seating here where it looks like they have rounds of 8 for 200 people. So something very simple like that is adequate, but this is great because like the catering company is able to do their job more successfully. So is the floral company, if you have grids set out. So you're not having to, you know, they're not like, okay, well, where do I need to put these linens and where do I need to put these flowers? So if you have grids, it just keeps everyone more organized, keeps everyone on track, and it keeps your frustration low on the day of because you aren't screening as many questions that are coming in, which can be very overwhelming if you're doing an event for, you know, quite a few people. So I just put some things to focus on here in your space grid to keep in mind. So, you know, just distinct areas like the kitchen, like the patio, dining room, bar, where everything's located. You'll actually be required to submit something like this to a fire marshal when you have a large event. And then lead generation, sign-in tables. So how are you capturing people's contact information? Because you want to follow up with them. So maybe you need to draw in where the table is going to go, where they're entering. So outlining all of that, then defining the traffic flow. So if you have a schedule with perhaps, you know, a networking little thing in the beginning, and then you have a cocktail hour, and then you have sit down dinner. So just going through that flow of where everyone's going. That way your staff is on the same page too when someone walks up and they're like, okay, it's 6 o'clock, where do I need to be? And it seems like a little thing, but if someone comes up, if you're a guest and you're asking a question and nobody knows the answer, I mean, we've all been there, it can be frustrating. So just outlining all of those things so it clears any sort of questions people have. So catered food service, this is important too. So if you're serving alcohol and you're serving food, you want to designate where those areas are, but not only that, if it's a buffet, for example, what is the direction of the buffet and how are they walking through it? You know, because everyone, for example, if you have your plates that you're grabbing from the table, if you didn't have them in line before the buffet, you know, some could start on one end and some could start on the other, and it could get to be a mess very quickly. So defining little things like that, even though it seems insignificant, is really important. The capacity of each space. So you can see over here in the dining room area, there's seating 200 over there. Service areas, we talked about that, the bar and the food. Parking and overflow. So if you have extra people that show up, what's your game plan? So if you only have seating for X amount of people, and then you have someone that RSVP'd a table for 10 and, you know, they don't have anywhere to sit, you know, ideally it's not going to happen, but like, what's your game plan there for overflow? Next, we're going to talk about vendors and partners. And I've touched on this a little bit, but, you know, a launch or a networking party really opens up the potential to showcase not only your product or service to people, but also the vendors that you choose to associate yourself with while you're doing this are a direct reflection of your business, because a lot of times it's not completely transparent who's working for who or who's partnering with who. So it's very important that as you go through the process of picking your business partners, your suppliers, and your vendors, that you do that thoughtfully and make sure they're somewhat vetted and you can trust them. You know, if you're doing this wedding reception, for example, and you have this catering company and it's like an hour before and nobody's there, we have a huge problem. So you just want to make sure that you are vetting these companies that you're using or getting good referrals as well. So an example of a vendor, what is a vendor? So a vendor is someone that you're partnering with for the event. And example of some of these is, these could get much more detailed if you're doing a larger event, but the ones that you would probably use at a launch party is an audiovisual company to handle any sort of sound that you have, or perhaps Wi-Fi, computer issues. A lot of those are sourced out. Some businesses like wedding venues in town, I'm sure, have all that internally, so they're not sourcing it out every time. But if you're a small venue, you may source that out to a company in the area. Florists, I know that we have some great florists in town, caterers, print materials. So I know I work with a few print companies in town, and Smithville has great resources for that. So if you're doing like posters or you're doing big banners, whatever that signage looks like, I know that you have access to that actually here locally. Photographer, videographer, and photo booth staff. So, if you're doing a very large event, you want to make sure you're adequately staffed. So the chamber may have some resources on companies that you could use in the area to get temporary staff. But if, a lot of these smaller businesses don't have 12 people or 15 people, however many it's going to take to get an event off the ground. So you would want to outsource something like that. And then promotional products. So we do a lot of promotional products in the corporate world because we have a lot of vendors, especially in the medical industry, pharmaceuticals, that want their logo on items that they're putting in the gift basket for pharmaceutical reps, for example. So we have tons of promotional products, whether it's like jewelry or, sunglasses, coffee cups, the list goes on. So promotional products, I don't know, I'm unaware if there's someone local who does that here, but I'm sure there's a ton of places in Austin that are able to provide that. I know that April got some really great wine glasses recently at the chamber, so she may have a local vendor for that. But those are just a few of the examples of vendors that you may be using for your party. So marketing your event, in order to have a successful event, you need to create awareness and define your message. So you first need to, of course, create awareness about the event venue, who you are, what your intentions are, and then define your message too. So if you're having a launch party to create awareness of your brand and of your business, your product, then who are you going to invite? I mean, who's it going to benefit you to invite to the party? So you would probably want to invite people in the event industry like wedding planners, caterers, florists, even if you're not using them for that specific service that time, you will want to invite them to your networking event. So then those are the people that are recommending your business as they're doing business. So go through there as you're creating your objectives and really define who is it beneficial to invite to this event in order to generate more business for my event. So, in Fredericksburg, I was on the board of this hospitality association, and we would do these marketing events for the event and hospitality industry like once a quarter. And we would invite anyone from photographers, videographers, caterers, people who own bakeries in town, restaurants. We invite all of these people because these are the ones that we're recommending to tourists coming in who would ask like, hey, we're thinking about getting married in Fredericksburg. Where should we get married? Who should we use as a caterer? So we would invite all of them. And a lot of times we would use some of them for their services there at the event, or allow them to set up a booth to promote their business. So that's a way to kind of make for your event, if you'd like to, you can bring exhibitors in and have them showcase their product. And you can either charge or not charge. So it could be a source of a little income, or you could just have them showcase some of the things that they're doing in town, depending on what kind of networking event you're going to have. So in order for your event to be successful, you really need to, apply impactful marketing strategies, because these are going to draw in your local businesses, as I just talked about, but also it's going to attract planners who have larger events. And, you know, we talked about this last week a little bit, but you guys are in a really great area where you're close enough to Austin and some of these larger cities where, you know, event planners would love to use Smithville space to do an offsite event. So you could really get in with that market as well and increase your exposure. So I think we're very well suited in this area to do sort of offsite events for larger corporations. So these are just a few of the things, and I won't go into too much detail because, I mean, we could talk all day about some of these points, but these are, I believe, are some of the more important things to have in place in order to have a successful launch party or networking event in your space. So first of all, you need to have an online presence, because it's just, if you have a website with photos on it, it's first going to filter in a lot of the calls that you're going to be getting about the event space, but it's also just going to raise awareness of who you are, what your product is. So having a website is really important. We're going to be doing a course.
I believe you have a filter
following
on
one
in
where
video settings.
We'll be talking about creating an online store through Squarespace, but I'll also be highlighting some of the tools.
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
So designing a website is very important to have. You can hire someone to do it. Squarespace is a great tool. GoDaddy has, you know, sort of template-based ones, but they aren't as robust as Squarespace. But if you already have a website, you just want to make sure that you're updating it consistently with relevant information or highlighting the event. So if you already have a great website, maybe you choose the top banner and you put in, you know, launch party on this date. So you just want to push that information so as people are visiting, they're able to see that and, you know, mark their calendars to go to that if it's an open event. Also, it's important, this kind of goes in line with the vendors and suppliers, but just building an online community as you're creating an event, that's why you want to have enough lead time. You know, you don't want to plan a launch party 2 weeks before you have it. You want to give yourself a significant amount of time to really co-market with other people, ask different vendors and suppliers to maybe share your event. You know, if you're using their services, for example, as a caterer, maybe you ask that catering company, hey, can you promote our event, and I'll promote you. So just building this online community is really important as you are marketing the event to get the word out. Of course, you want to develop your social media profiles. Some social media is better than others when you're trying to promote events. You know, like I wouldn't recommend Twitter for a small event as much as I would maybe like Instagram and Facebook. So just develop those social media profiles if you don't have those. And then consistent posting is the key. So if I have an event 6 months from now and I post about it and I try to get some excitement about it, and then I don't post again for like a week before the event, you're not really going to be doing yourself any good, right? So you want to make sure and be consistent, whether it's once or twice a week, you post about it as things are developing for the event. Maybe you have a particular band that's going to come play, you want to highlight. Just create, you know, you can just, a lot of people have social media calendars where they have the content they're going to push weekly, but you know, you could just post small things like maybe you're excited about what you're serving food wise, or the caterer you're using, or the florist is amazing. You want to post a picture and you want to tag her in it. So you can get all sorts of creative when it comes to that, but just be consistent when posting about your event because you want to keep it top of mind. Also, an important one, of course, is to get with your local chamber of commerce, because they have a lot of tools, especially if you're a member, that they can use in order to promote it too. They have a good list of events on their website. April and I were just talking about that. They also send out an email that goes out, so you could request, you know, I don't know the details of that, but you know, you could request maybe getting added to their distribution list, because then you're just, you know, touching more people if someone already has an existing list that they're able to send the event information from. And then this we've kind of touched on already, but just compiling relevant invitation lists, make sure that, if you're trying to generate more business, make sure your list of people that you're inviting, guests that you're inviting to this event are relevant. So just keeping it in line with like people in your industry, people that would be interested in doing events there, or locals that, know a lot of people and will spread the word for you. So just get creative about that. And then also media. So it's important to get with, the newspaper, if they have one here, or whoever is pushing content, get with them, have them maybe do help you with the press release or a highlight of the event, and then have them do a write-up afterwards if they have the ability to do that and share some of the pictures. Sponsorships and exhibitors. This is just something that, if you want to increase maybe income for the event, if you're doing a larger one, you could talk to different people about sponsoring, or if you want to cut some of the costs. A good example is like maybe you want to get with a local beer company or a wine company. You want them to come out and showcase like 2 different beers or a wine, and they actually cover the cost for that. So then it's not coming out of your pocket. So there's a lot of creative ways through sponsorship and exhibitors that you're able to offset some of the cost in your budget. And if anyone has any specific questions about that, I'm happy to dive into it because it's a whole other topic. But for large corporations, when you're doing things like trade shows, that's how they make all their money, is through sponsorships and exhibitors and then attendees. And then, of course, post-event follow-up is just as important as marketing it, because as you're gaining all these leads through the process of the event, whether it's like a electronic sign up when you come in, or it's, them putting their name in a fishbowl to get a prize, then you capture their information. It's important to follow up with those, just to, it's a small gesture, but it goes a long way. Thank your vendors for coming. Thank your guests for coming. Let them know what's coming up, and keep them in the loop. So the last thing really is the day of logistics. So the day of logistics, which just putting everything down on paper is very important in order to be successful. So, assigning those roles and responsibilities, as we discussed, focusing on the details will really ensure that nothing goes through the cracks. And I spoke about this a little bit. It's similar to a timeline, but I call it an event spec. And it's really just, I put it in Word, and a lot of it's maybe like copied and pasted from different emails that I provide, that have gone back and forth. I insert my diagrams, it's all in one place. It has all the contact information for all of my vendors. So, if something happened to the event planner, you want to think, like, hopefully nothing does, but the day of the event, something happens and she's unable to make it, and she's the main event planner. It's always been very important in the industry that you're able to have all the information in one place. So anyone, of course, we carry a lot of things in our head, but like anyone's able to come along and take over the event. So this is really what the event spec is for. So the day of the event, you want to create, well, this will be created up to the day of the event. So of course you don't want to spend all the day doing your event spec. At this point, you should have all the details outlined. But you want to make sure and assign staff to specific tasks so nobody's getting overwhelmed. You want to follow up with all the vendors in the morning and ensure that everyone's on the same page, get the times. If this is a larger event, you may want to start this the day before, but you just want to make sure that you know what time everyone's going to be there, what the setup is, things like that. Follow up the media that you're having out at your event to ensure that they're going to be there. Any sort of you want to check and make sure that all of your event materials have arrived. So name tags, any print materials, posters, anything that you're using at the event, promotional items. We typically at corporate events have like a huge room where everything's sent to, and then we do inventory like a week before. That way we make sure that nothing's missing, but just make sure everything's there that's supposed to be there. And then really understand how you're going to do that sign up and then the lead generation for the event, because those are the folks that you're going to be following up with for future business. Review your setup with your team. This is really important. Make sure everyone's on the same page with roles and responsibilities. Ensure that you have your giveaway, door prizes there, and then talk about parking overflow, signage, and the greeters. So these are all just sort of you know, things that you would already have touched at some point, but you want to make sure that they're all included in your event spec. As I said, so if something happens or, you know, you need to share the responsibility, it's all in one place and it avoids a lot of that back and forth chaos on the day of. And then post-event, you know, as I said, a lot of the events that we do, we're there like 3 or 4 days early. We have 2 to 3 days of actual event, and then we're there for post-event, because a lot of the post-event information is really important for the success of your event next year. And then also just making sure that you're able to, you know, like compare your actual versus budget costs, things like that. So really reviewing the event, debriefing, talking about how it went, what could we do better. So typically what I do after an event, regardless if it's small or large, is we have a debrief meeting. And this includes anyone from like the marketing team to audiovisual to the event planners. And we always had a list of things that were done well and then areas of improvement. So after the event, you just want to make sure and have that debrief meeting. You also want to follow up with the guests. So deciding how you want to do that, whether it's phone call, email, thank them for coming. Anyone, if you distributed any sort of promotional items, you want to try to get those to the non-attendees. And then a big one is really comparing your actual versus your budgeted cost to see where you are on all of that. And after events, what I typically do is I have a binder for each one of the events that I've done. It's passed on to whoever I'm working on the event side for the corporation. And for each event, we just have a final binder that has all of this information, like the debrief, the budget, actual, you know, how many hotel rooms we booked versus how many we had slated out to use. So I include the budget in there, the spec we discussed, it had all of the information, diagrams, a copy of any sort of printed materials, or mailings that went out for the event, notes, of course, the debrief, catering costs. So I always put like any of the final catering bills or florists, I put that all in there, the timeline and the budget. And this is all really important because next year, a lot of these events that I do, we do year over year. So, you know, we have like a 2020 eye care sales event for someone in pharmaceutical. And then the next year we do the same event. It's usually a different venue, different content, but you want to go back and reference all of these because it makes your life a lot easier, as you know, when you're able to reference something rather than start from scratch. So post-event is just as important as a planning process, that get it all tied up and decide what your next steps are for your business. I know that was a lot of information, so if anyone has any questions, let me know. I'm always happy to answer. I attached my email down there. If anyone has any specific questions or if you're planning an event, I'm happy to, you know, you can pick my brain about it and give you some advice of years of doing events. I'm sure we've all learned a lot, so.
Thank you, Abby. I've had several questions pop in. But before I go into those questions, for those of you that are watching live or watching later in our archived copy of this presentation, Abby is correct. We have many fantastic local vendors. The Chamber, of course, puts on several very large events a year, and I'll just use as an example our Chamber Banquet. It typically has a little over 300 people attending that event each year. We use many local vendors. We use lots of local beer and wine distributors, printers, lots of local. Of course, we certainly do have a local newspaper, the Smithville Times, as well as the Bastrop Advertiser. There's lots of advertising opportunities for your events. So reach out to the Chamber of Commerce if you're not aware or not certain of what's available here in our community. Of course, we're big advocates of shopping locally, and we have some fantastic printers, florists, all sorts of live music that's available for your event. Pretty much anything that you would need to put on a large event, whether it's a big fun entertainment style event or our local recreation and event center is perfectly situated to have a small conference, for example, with a space for keynote speakers and breakout sessions. All of that we can help you set up here through our chamber. And if you're trying to schedule, or if you're trying to convert your own space into an event center, there are lots of great local florists and wedding planners and DJs and everything, that all those people that want to be involved in your event. So having vendors and having space for people to come and showcase their events. For example, we have a great local wedding wedding event space called Ponderosa, which is right outside of Smithville. They have a beautiful several thousand square foot space, and they do open houses every quarter, and they bring in florists and people that sell or rent out wedding clothing and all the things that you need to put on a really big, successful event. We have all of that available right here locally. And as Abby said, of course, if we don't, Austin's right up the road. But typically, I do several very large events throughout the year in Smithville, from huge festivals that take up multiple days on our main street to big, our big casino night, and jamboree happens here that has 10 or 12,000 people come a year. Almost all vendors that come in are local. So we're very fortunate that we have all of that available right here in our community. One of the questions that came in for you, Abby, was what has been your experience, or have you used event apps for your large events, where people would download an app that they would use to figure out what's happening, where it's happening, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so typically for the events, I would say like 95% of the events that I do, they have internal IT team that develops those, especially when it comes to like pharmaceutical or IT, oil and gas. There's a lot of proprietary information. So they have an IT team that develops it. If you need recommendations on someone to help develop, I do have some contacts who are able to do that for you. But yeah, we absolutely use an app, and as people are registering and coming in, we make sure it's downloaded on their phone. It tells them where all the breakout sessions in it. It's very robust. It has all the speaker bios, where the offsites are, so it's very detailed. I don't build those on my own just because we have an internal team that does it, depending on which one of my clients we're holding an event for. But those are great, and you can very easily, I'm happy to pass along the information, find developers who would do that.
Okay. The next question has to do with tracking the people that come to your event. Let's say, for example, as we are here in a small market, people are always worried about who actually came to their event as opposed to who RSVP'd or who said they were going to come. What is your best experience for a low cost option for tracking attendance so that you can reach out to those folks post event?
What I typically do is there's a lot of email marketing services like MailChimp or something like that, where you could create a form. So you could have an iPad out, and it can be a form where it's like name, email, business, whatever contact information. And before they enter, especially if it's a networking event, people are expected to do that. So they compile all their information. They get a name tag if they, which I think is a great idea for a networking event, put their name, their business name. But you can create a form through someone like MailChimp, it's an email marketing service, which is like when you receive, you buy something and ask, do you want to get up on our email distribution list? That's essentially what it is. It's just a platform that allows you to send out marketing campaigns. So what I recommend doing is using any of those services where you're able to create a form. You can do that in Squarespace as well. They just come in, they put in their name, their email address, business name, and it goes into an Excel spreadsheet. And then you very easily, after the event, instead of like entering manually all the names, especially if several hundred people come, it's very laborious. So I would just go in, do something like that, and then post event, send a thank you to everyone. And it's at a click of a button. You could create an email that's going to go to everyone in 5 minutes rather than spending hours. Of course, if you have a smaller event and it's 50 people, it may be better, especially if you're trying to find vendors or suppliers, to call them personally and create that relationship, because a lot of people just delete emails. But depending on the size, there's different tools that you can use. But I like something that's automated, so you're not manually entering it. But you know, another way to do it, which is creative, is you could get with a lot of local businesses in town. You create some sort of gift basket that you want to give away at the event, and people can put their name and their phone number, and they could drop it in the basket, and that's how you get their contact information, and then you do a giveaway. So there's all sorts of ways that you can create.
Okay. There's another question here about silent auctions.
Mhm.
And have you have you administered silent auctions at your events before?
Yes, I have.
And
And
so
so some
the
options
reason
get a little tricky. Oh, go ahead.
I want to clarify that the question is, we're considering doing a silent auction, a virtual silent auction this year. Have you done a virtual silent auction versus a live silent auction, and what are your thoughts?
Virtual gets a little tricky because you have to put significant amount of tools in place to make sure that the bidding is all lined up correctly, you know, and that people that aren't overbidding or it's closed and they're bidding and whatever the case is. But I have done those, but I will say it's for me, it's been hard in the past to get a lot of items for auctions in general. So typically we actually partner with these companies. One of them I think is called Charity Auction. I could think of the rest, but what they actually do is they will send you memorabilia. I mean, it could be like a signed, you know, George Strait record with a poster and everything. They send it to you for free. So it's essentially on consignment for it. So sometimes we'll order like 30 or 40 of those big ticket items, and then you send them back and you don't have any liability. But if someone bids on one of the items, then they take a small percentage of it and you get over the minimum, if that makes sense. So say for the George Strait, maybe the minimum is $500 and someone bids 1,000, then you would get 500 and they would get 500. So we typically use third party for a lot of that, just because I think people get asked all the time to donate things, and especially at certain times of the year. So we've had a lot more success doing that than actually going out and getting items. But I would say in-person auction is, they have apps and stuff for auctions that you can do online. So I recommend just using one of those instead of reinventing the wheel. But I would say live auctions are a little bit better, and they've always been more fruitful.
The last question I have here has to do with catering and plated events versus
Mhm.
buffet. The question is, what are your thoughts on plated versus buffet?
It's more economical to do buffet for the most part. And I think that if you're doing a plated meal, I think it's always more elegant to do something like that. If you're doing a big charity event at a golf course or something, it's better to do a plated meal because you're getting served rather than having to get up and actually serve yourself. So it's just sold this whole concept of like not having to do anything, right? So I always reserve catered sit-down events for more of our upscale dinners. Whereas buffet, I do a lot of buffet or like past for cocktail hours and things like that. And it really just depends on what you're doing. I mean, it's all over the board as far as buffet versus plated versus, you know, grab and go. So if it's the last day of an event that we're doing and people are trying to get to the airport, a lot of times we'll do a really nice like to-go bag where they can just grab it and go. There's a lot more waste with buffet for sure. But usually the price point is lower, and you could get more creative too, because what you're able to do on the buffet, you know, it's a little more tricky when you're doing a plated meal, especially on timing, because stuff can only sit out for so long, right?
Absolutely. All right. Well, that was the last of our questions. And in fact, that's perfect timing because it's just a couple minutes before 1 o'clock. Again, I want to thank those of you that are on our watching our class today. Thank you for submitting your questions, and thank you, Abby, for such a great presentation. We appreciate that. Is there a series of these classes? Is there another one, or is this the end of this series?
No, this is the last. Yeah, this is the
Okay.
last one.
All right.
Next week we'll do something else.
I know that Abby is going to be offering other classes as well. We have several other great presenters. So please check out smithvilletx.org and click on events, and you'll see all of our online class offerings. Be sure and register for those classes. They're all, of course, free at no charge. And again, we thank you for being here today, and be sure and join us again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.